Hey guys, how's it going? Here with you today with Truth. I just muted me, put the logo on the screen, all kinds of fun stuff. Give me just a second here. Okay, there we go. I have never had this happen before. Give me just a second here, guys. There we go. There it is. I don't know what happened there. That logo just took over. The logo said, "I don't want to leave. I'm sorry. Like we're here. We're not going anywhere." Well, guys, thank you for all of you that are already chiming in. I know there's some people watching all over the globe today because these guys are like me. They're kind of globetrotters, and we're just happy to have everybody under one roof, so to say, today. So I'm going to go ahead and bring these guys on board. We're talking with Apologetics on Mission today. Ben Clifton and Doug Anson, they are making waves in places where most of us have never been or ventured to, and we are excited to hear about some of the things that they are doing. And I'm excited for you guys to meet these guys. We're going to talk about some pretty global ideas today. So looking forward to this.
Thanks for.
Hold on. For some reason, everything was muted just then, so I don't. Try again there, Doug.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. I don't know. Something's weird is going on today. So if you guys didn't hear any of that, we're here with Doug Hanson and Ben Clifton, and
All
these
right, all
guys
right.
these guys do apologetics and missions. They're all over the world. Short intro. There you go. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Um, so Doug, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us why you're into apologetics now.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bill, for having us. Technology is both wonderful and scary, right?
Blessing and a curse.
That's right. But in fact, we couldn't, I guess it'll become obvious, we couldn't do our mission without this kind of technology. So we love it and we'll work through the difficulties. But yeah, my background. Um, I'm retired from a couple of careers, both science and military. and didn't frankly didn't know much or anything about apologetics until later in my life when my oldest son came home from college. And as you would imagine, he was raised in a Christian environment, but like the statistics, the George Barna statistics say, 70% of the kids raised in an active Christian home go off to a secular university and they walk away from their faith, and he's one of them.
Hmm.
And that was a shock to me, but a shock and a blessing because I probably wouldn't be on this podcast right now if that hadn't happened. Because what it did was it led me on a path to not only dig deep and try to completely understand what it is I believed and why I believed it, but in the process of that, I discovered apologetics. To my amazement, I was just awestruck by it and found myself going back to seminary, first at Denver Seminary, and then transferred over to Biola, the Talbot School of Theology, and got my degree. And this kicked off what Ben and I like to call God things, a series of God things that led me to many people and this emerging organization that was originally called Adventurous Apologetics, and I'll let Ben explain that, which quickly became Apologetics on Mission. And it was a result of me close to finishing my degree. And my wife smartly asked me, she said, "Well, you spent a lot of time and our money getting another degree. What are you going to do with it?" And I had been teaching at my church. That's the first thing I did when I learned apologetics, was approach my church and ask if I could teach, and they graciously let me do that, and discovered in the process that there were a lot of people like me who were struggling with how to talk to this younger generation. and they found apologetics to be new in most cases and very encouraging to them in their own faith, and then giving them ways to talk to their own children and family members who were not believing. But after my wife asked me that question, what are you going to do? I said, well, beyond the church, I'm not sure. And then I came in contact with Ben and the woman at the time that he was working with and establishing this new ministry, and jumped on board. And we'll fill in the rest of the story. But that's how I got started. Yeah.
That's awesome. Ben, tell us about your journey in apologetics.
Yeah, you bet. So, again, thanks, Bill, for having us. This is an honor and a blessing. So, my journey is maybe a little bit atypical. So, I was not raised in a Christian home. In fact, it was decidedly not very welcoming to Christianity as a whole, especially for my dad, who really adopted kind of the if God kills his son to save the world, that makes him a moral monster. So that was kind of the upbringing I had. I'm an engineer and a scientist by trade, and so all through my upbringing, I felt very secure that science provided really all the answers to life's big questions, and belief in anything supernatural was something of the past that we ought to reject. And so, gosh, then after college, started work, met my wife, who actually was a Christian. And despite her better judgment, she married me. And into our marriage, I started going to church with her, mostly to make her happy, and sat in the back row for about 4 years. Now, during our early part of our marriage, she gave me a little book called Mere Christianity, and I diligently read that, just again to placate her and to tell her that, hey, at least I read the book that you gave me. And there was one particular argument in C.S. Lewis's masterpiece there that, as a good ministry friend of ours likes to say, put a stone in my shoe. And it was Lewis's articulation of the moral argument. And he does a masterful job. And he really painted me into a corner. And I figured someday I'll figure this out, I'll solve this, but for now it's kind of got me. So I'm just going to put it on the shelf. So throughout, the next couple of years, whenever the topic of God or anything came up, I always had that stone in my shoe coming up and challenging me. So 4 years into going to church with my wife, and also going through a few challenging life situations, when the altar call was made, which was done every week at this church, I found myself raising my hand and receiving the Lord as my Savior. Now, that was very much a heart thing for me. I reflect back, and it was the occasion that by God's grace, He pulled out my heart of stone and gave me a heart of flesh. And so I totally believed in my heart, but my head didn't really know what was going on. So I started seeking answers, and God is so good to young believers. I finally had the courage to go into a Christian bookstore, and what did I discover but this little book by a scientist named Hugh Ross that was called The Fingerprints of God. And I opened it up, and I could not believe it, because here was a cosmologist and a PhD scientist, astrophysicist, who was dealing with all of the scientific issues that I had previously used to justify my atheism. So that was my first experience really with apologetics besides C.S. Lewis, and I fell in love with it just like Doug did, and discovered this entire buffet of mind food, and launched wholeheartedly into the life of the mind. So I had the opportunity to go to Bible college and get some foundational biblical studies and doctrine stuff under my belt. And then started doing a lot of ministry, actually with Reasons to Believe, Hugh Ross's ministry, um, and did a lot of work in the Pacific Northwest where I live. Went back to school to Biola to get my master's degree, which was an awesome experience. And then, yeah, we'll tell more of the continuing story how that led to AOM. But that's kind of how I got into apologetics, and it's been a big part of my walk with Christ.
Yeah, very. I didn't realize all of that, Ben. You and I have known each other for a while, but I didn't. I guess, come to think of it, I'd heard you sort of mention your upbringing and things, but I come from a very similar path, and yeah, that's really interesting, brother. That's really interesting. I should go ahead and give a shameless plug for Houston Christian University during this part of the interview. Sitting in between two masters in apologetics guys, but yeah, both schools, Houston Christian University and Biola, are great for apologetics if people are wanting to look into that. They're two very different programs too, so it just depends on your interests. So yeah, I am very excited about hearing some of this stuff. So, because I'll give you a little bit of background. The first mission trip that I ever took was to Uganda and Kenya in 2019. And two places you guys are very familiar with. And the purpose of this mission trip was to go over and teach some polemics and apologetics against the prosperity gospel movement that's just taken all of the global south by storm. And I hadn't had any formal apologetics training at this point, but I'd had about 4 years of Bible college, and I was getting ready to graduate. And actually in 2020 is when we moved down here to Houston to start my master's in apologetics. But I can remember sitting around the table in Bombo, Uganda, with this non-denominational church and all of their elders, and the pastor's wife had a good, like a little one-table restaurant that she fed street kids out of and stuff. It was a beautiful little ministry. Eating all this authentic Ugandan food, for better or for worse sometimes. To be honest, it's because sometimes nothing against Uganda. It's just you just get sick for no reason. It's like it tasted fine. Like why? But
I don't know about that.
Yeah. And gosh, I don't know. 5-6 hours later, I look at my clock, and all we've sat there and talked about is theology and apologetics. And I was like, man, that was the day that I got hooked. It's like not only was I doing apologetics in the church there in Uganda, but I got hooked that day. And then Saturday rolled around, and the pastor said, you should do a talk tomorrow about Islam and the differences between Islam and Christianity, because a lot of our ladies are taking their selves and their kids to the mosque on Friday night because these Muslims are setting up schools over here in Uganda, and a lot of people, they have so little biblical knowledge and even less Quranic knowledge. They don't know the difference between the Bible and the Quran. The Bible, they think that Jesus is exactly the same in both. And I was like, man, apologetics is the biggest need in the mission field right now, is just people teaching. And then I saw, I don't think she's with you guys anymore, but one of the founders speaking at the Lanier Theological Library. So I've known about you guys before you even knew my name. And I remember going up to her and saying, like, I want a piece of this. This is amazing. You're taking apologetics into the mission field. This is a huge need. So what got you guys to have this vision? I mean, were you overseas and just saw it, or did you just have a heart for missions and just tell me the story. How did this come? Because a lot of people, when they think of apologetics, it's largely a Western enterprise, but it's really what I'm seeing, you're seeing, it's really not either. There's apologetics everywhere now. So how did you discover it? How did you get into all that?
Yeah, I can go first, and then Doug's story just merges right into my story. So, boy, a lot of similarities with your experience. So, I started getting involved in a ministry here in Oregon called Eternal Impact, and I took my first mission trip with Eternal Impact in 2017. And like you, I had this I look back and I'm ashamed of it, but I didn't even make the connection of like doing missions work in Uganda and doing anything with apologetics. And so, I was there on the ground, and God orchestrated it such that I ended up having a conversation with a group of young medical students, and the topic of apologetics came up just as I was sharing, a little bit of the testimony that you just heard about me, and their ears lit up and say, "Hey, we really are interested in apologetics. We don't know really anything about it, but tell us more." So that ensued, and again, it was a long conversation into the evening, and it was the turning point that just opened my eyes to the opportunity, the need, the opportunity, and really the call. And this was just in Uganda, but I quickly discovered that the challenge is global, and we in the West have the benefit of so many great ministries and leaders and resources. I mean, you can just pretty much turn anywhere. We have no excuse for not embracing apologetics. And I was already really engaged here in the Pacific Northwest, but I said, gosh, what if I come back next year and try and do some apologetics training and teaching and whatnot? So 2018, I did that, and it was just amazing. The Lord really opened up a lot of opportunities that were way bigger than I anticipated, and again, just reinforced that hunger and need and enthusiasm for learning how to better defend the faith, both for ourselves as believers, but also to give us confidence to go and share with others. So, I kept going back year after year. By this time, I had pretty much off ramped my high tech career. I was into the wonderful world of nonprofit ministry, and and teamed up with a number of people, including, you mentioned Kristen Davis was one of our co-founders early on, and so we started hatching the idea of doing a ministry, and in 2022 we officially launched it. Started out as Adventurous Apologetics, but we quickly realized that was a different thing, and we really needed to be Apologetics on Mission. So we've been a ministry now we're into our 4th year, and the Lord has just been really, really good. And we'll talk more about what we do at AOM. But maybe Doug, share how you got engaged.
Yeah. Just to go back to how my son was, the unfortunate situation with my son walking away from his faith was really the start of this. But my quest initially was to figure out how I could talk to my son. Okay. And since he represented what I call a class of non believers, that's 70% here in the West, particularly young people who have heard the gospel, maybe understand what it is, but say no. What I discovered was that everything that I'd been taught in the churches that I'd been membership of was mission-wise was to get to the gospel as quickly as possible. Well, that didn't work with my son, okay, because that was one of the words he didn't want to hear. And so I said, well, how can I talk to him and people like him? Again, that led me back to school, teaching at church. I began to realize that this was a bigger issue than I thought. So when my wife asked me, what are you going to do with it? I said, I don't know. I'm praying about it. I got this email from someone by the name of Kristen Davis. I had no idea who she was. And apparently it was a blast of an email. And I was on her mailing list, I guess because I was a Biola student at the time, getting close to graduation. And it said, if you have a degree in apologetics and you would like to teach apologetics at secular universities in Europe, I want to talk to you. Now, this was prior to AOM being formed, so this was something that was in her mind, and I got all excited. I printed that email out, I put it next to my computer, and I said, as soon as I'm graduating, I'm sending her an email. That just sounds super exciting. And so sure enough, that's what I did. And by the time I graduated and contacted her, she and Ben were now working together. And I said, well, and they told me, well, the focus has shifted. We're focusing on Africa right now in Uganda, where Ben had been working. And it turned out that they had just come back from a trip to Uganda and had learned that while they did great things while they were there on the ground, there was this blank space or lack of activity in between the mission trips. And they had concluded that what they really needed to develop was an online course to train those that they had been working with in between the missions. Well, I had been teaching at church and had taught courses that I'd developed, worldviews and evangelism and things like that. I said, well, here I am, the new guy. I raised my hand and I said, if that's what you need, can I put something together? And so we did. We put together sometimes we call it our flagship course, Introduction to International Apologetics. And that's the course that we teach in between mission trips. Why the word international? Well, I inserted that word purposely. One was we were training foreign students. The focus was not in the U.S., the focus was outside the U.S. And we believe that the content of the course represents apologetic topics and information that all Christians, all apologists, no matter where they live, what cultures and what particular issues they have, they should understand these topics. And then the hope is, through this course, that they take this and then contextualize it, perhaps put it into the language where they live, and begin to apply it in the ways that they need. So that drew me in, and so my focus has been in the academic side of the house for Apologetics on Missions, and we've developed additional courses, but I've also got a mission component to it as well, which we can talk as we continue this conversation. But that's my story, and I tell you, I'm retired from 2 civilian careers, and so when people ask me, are you retired? I said, well, it depends on what you mean by retired. I'm not drawing any money. In fact, this ministry is costing me money, but I'll tell you, what a joy. What a joy it is to work for the greater good. I worked for the federal government, both militarily and science-wise, at a national laboratory, and that was very rewarding, but nothing more rewarding than showing people salvation in eternity.
That's right. And you were was it a 3-star general, I think?
No, just a 2-star. Yeah.
Just two.
Yeah,
no big
right.
deal.
Yeah.
My bad. No. Yeah. So, and I'll tell you, you run that class like a 2-star general too. Like that class is so Loctite, and so I love how comfortable but succinct it is. And a lot of people don't realize, like, you really need to be that way when you're working with international communities. Like, it has to be like, it starts now, it ends now, within reason, with a little wiggle room, and it's a wonderful course. And by the way, that course is open to anyone who wants to sign up for it. And you can hop on the Apologetics on Mission website and look that stuff up. Can you sign up for November's course now? Is that open yet, or is that coming?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So it's.
So we believe in Ratio Christi, we believe so much in Apologetics on Mission's courses, by the way, that we require all of if you have no apologetics background whatsoever, what I love about Apologetics on Mission and the course that they offer is that we can take somebody. I actually just had this conversation with a gentleman this morning. He has a very base level of apologetics, but he wants to start a ministry. Excuse me. Rogue cough there. He wanted to start a ministry in a school in Kenya, a very like a kid's school, and he's like, so how can I get more? Like, can I get some training in this apologetic stuff? I'm like, well, yeah, actually, in November, there's a course that's going to be rolling around, and we expect anybody who's never had any training to take that course. 16-week course. They have a lot of I would say celebrity apologists chime in, that come in and talk and teach things. It's a phenomenal course. If anybody wants to take their apologetics knowledge a little bit further, reach out to me or just go on to the Apologetics on Mission website. We'll try to get you hooked up there. So, so what are the differences you guys think between, like, you've done apologetics in the West, and apologetics in the West is one thing. But then, what is apologetics like when you take this over into another country, into the global South, they call it, or the majority world context? So, what would be the difference between Asia, Africa, the West versus Europe and America when we're talking apologetics?
I'll let you go, Ben.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is it's a little bit too coarse to make a subdivision between just the West and the global South because
Mm,
it's really different between Africa and Taiwan, for example.
mm,
Um, so, generally speaking, I would say that there's even less awareness of apologetics in the global South. Let's just take Africa, for example. Um, there's less awareness of like the term apologetics, and certainly less accessibility to any resources or ministries that are doing that. Although there is some, and I'm so happy to see that even in the short time I've been doing this, that's changing pretty rapidly. Um, so unawareness, lack of resources, but at the same time, there's a very quick adoption. So once, I mean, the concept is very straightforward. It's just answering questions about why we believe what we believe. Once that logjam, that initial awareness is raised, then there's tremendous enthusiasm, and there's I've found like broad acceptance within churches, within even universities and schools to welcome apologetics activity there. And in terms of the content, what we find is there's actually a remarkable number of common denominator themes, and increasingly so with the younger generation, because the challenges that they're facing are very similar to the challenges that the younger generation here are facing because the access to the internet and smartphones and devices is just pumping Western secularism all around the world. So there is this common denominator of concerns, but then in each region, there's unique challenges. Like in Africa, there's a lot of still Africa traditional religions,
mm-hmm,
and there's a lot of syncretism, kind of combining the two. There is still a lot of sort of leftover from colonialization, and one of the questions we often get asked almost every time is why should an African believe in this white man's religion that came to us from slave trading colonialists, right?
mm-hmm.
That's kind of the thought, and so we have to deal with those kind of questions. So there's kind of common denominator questions and then specific contextualized questions that they face, and those vary, wildly between different regions.
Would you say also, Ben, that sometimes would you say also that sometimes you need to make first the case for apologetics before you start teaching apologetics? Because sometimes people have a very and this happens quite a bit in the States. This isn't just a global South thing. Some people think apologetics is just learning how to argue better.
Mm-hmm.
Like learning how to win a fight, basically.
I think that's a good point. We encounter that, I would say, more in the West than we do in the regions we work. It's more, I guess, a concern that hey, is this something really that Christians ought to be doing? Isn't this something that is sort of going against faith? Aren't we supposed to just blindly believe? I mean, we've given kind of taught the wrong idea of what faith is, and so I guess the perception is more not so much argumentation, but more it's an expression maybe of lack of faith, and so we really have to combat that. And Doug will share, I'm sure, later on. The very first advanced course that we're now offering is called The Apologetics of Jesus.
Hmm.
And we're specifically doing that because it was the number one thing requested, but it also is demonstrating how Jesus did apologetics and if Jesus did it, then then we should be doing it. So that's been kind of one of the bigger hurdles that we've had to go through. But generally speaking, the people we encounter are all on board, and there's a lot of enthusiasm to get started on this.
Yeah, let me reiterate or give some examples of what Ben's been talking about. Yes, the commonality is that Christians pretty much all around the world don't know what apologetics is, and which is, well, and I was one of them. But it's absolutely amazing when you realize that apologetics is a branch of theology, of Christian theology, and it has been around certainly since the time of Christ and the early church, and there's a whole history of how apologetics has been practiced throughout the history of the church as apologists rose up to address the cultural issues of the time, whether they were theological or whatever. So yes, the commonality, whether we go to Uganda or we go to Brazil or we go to Croatia or we go to Taiwan, most of them haven't heard of it. And then as soon as we share what it is, their eyes get big. Again, just like me. And they're asking themselves, why didn't I know about this? And immediately want to learn more. But you're absolutely right. What we have to do is tell them what apologetics is. And in most cases, at least we assume this, and I think it's safe to assume this, that they want to be sure that it is legitimate, that it does have a biblical basis. So the first class we teach in Introduction to International Apologetics is what is apologetics? And the way I teach it has evolved over these 4 years. I now begin that class by saying, you all know the verse that says, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. What does it mean to love the Lord with your mind? And I ask that question. And most Christians just roll those three things up, the heart, the soul, and the mind, into one thing. And they tend to have a heart orientation towards their faith, which, of course, if they're believers, it's because the Holy Spirit has changed their heart. But then I say, well, what are the elements of faith? We need to talk about what is faith. And I bring forward the three elements, Latin for notitia, assensus, and fiducia, but you have to have knowledge of what it is that you believe in. You have to accept that as being true, and those are the head components of the faith. And then, of course, the fiducia part is the heart part, that you totally buy into it, that complete trust, and your life changes. And then we go from there and say, well, okay. And just to give you another way of how I articulate it, I'll say, if you meet a non-believer and they ask you, why are you a Christian? The answer that I give, first off, it's interesting to ask Christians here in the U.S. and all over the world, why are you a Christian? And I'll tell you, people struggle with that. Many of them will say, well, I grew up in the church. Well, that's not a good enough reason that you grew up and your mom and dad told you what you're supposed to believe. Right. But if I get asked that question, I'll say, well, there's two parts to my faith. There's the head part and the heart part. And the heart part is, I have always sensed the presence of the Lord. But I know when I say something like that to a non-believer that they don't get that. By definition, they don't have that heart knowledge of the Lord. And I say, but the other part of it is my head. And that usually gets their attention because I don't hear Christians talk that way. And I say, there's an intellectual component to my faith. And if my head is not in sync with my heart, I'm vulnerable. I'm vulnerable to challenges to my faith. And of course, that oftentimes leads to interesting discussions because they're going to ask, well, what do you mean about an intellectual component to your faith? And that's what apologetics is all about. So it leads to very interesting, challenging, but fruitful discussions that, if nothing else, I can honestly say no one has ever walked away from a discussion like that and said, well, now I believe in Jesus. But I tell you, I think they walk away from it saying, you know what? I didn't realize that sounded rational to me. Here Christians in the U.S. or atheists in the U.S. will accuse us of being irrational and having no intellectual basis for what we believe in. And unfortunately, most Christians can't talk about the rational intellectual basis for their faith. But once you do, it's amazing. And it begins to change minds. And of course, I hope that that's what I can do with my son. And we're working on that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll give you. Did I ever tell you guys how I introduce apologetics to people? I've actually found this works really well in Africa. So they're like apologet. I tell people just right out of the gate. I break the rule. I say I'm an apologist. Now that doesn't mean that I go apologizing for things. I believe in apologetics, and I said, and I guarantee you, all of you are apologists too. And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, I want you to raise your hand if you've ever defended the truths in the Bible, defended who Jesus is, if you've ever made any kind of defense for Christianity against an atheist, a Muslim, or whoever. And everybody raises their hand. I was like, wow. So I'm in a room full of apologists. So now that we've got that out of the way, it's true. It's one of those things that people do. Apologetics is something that people do intuitively. Like if somebody started bashing my wife, like verbally, I would immediately take up for her. Why? Because I love her. You know, if you love something, you're going to defend it. So it's just a matter of whether or not we do it well, and that's the task. You know, overseas and everywhere is that. You know, can we get deeper in our defense? Absolutely. As much as the lawyer can know a case, we can get deeper in our defense. And I find that every time I go deeper, I just get closer to the Lord. It's just really,
right.
You know, we have an evidential faith, right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so Christianity is not a blind faith. It never has been, never will be. Just too much evidence out there, man. Too much evidence.
Yep. Yeah, so, Bill, I want to just echo what you said there because I really believe it strongly. And so, you know, the question for us Christians isn't whether we are going to be apologists, right? It's whether we're going to be good apologists or poor apologists. And really, we're all about helping people become better apologists. And we benefit ourselves personally. I was just talking to my church about this, and I concluded why I love apologetics is because it is fun. And, you know, it is joyful as it is for me to be playing my guitar in the worship band, you know, thinking about these things and discovering great answers, the best answers to the big worldview questions out there through, you know, the Christian faith is fun. And it brings me a joy that is every bit as wonderful as the joy of singing or praying or whatever.
It's worship in a lot of ways. Just had a family visit us. Just a quick story. Just how powerful this ministry can be. We, of course, with Ratio Christi, we have evangelism training and stuff that goes on every week. And we were doing our training meeting, and there were two teenage girls that came down with a buddy of mine. We were playing music last week. He came down to play with me. And his youngest daughter, after that meeting, the whole last half of the session was about how to formulate a good question about the problem of evil. That was our burden. So we were like, all right, we're talking about this on our campus. How can we formulate this question? And this little girl innocently looks up at me, 8th grade, and she goes, Bill, what makes for a good question? How do you formulate that? That was really interesting. I was like, actually, you just asked a great question.
Yeah.
Right there. It's like, and you know, this stuff is so simple that 8th graders can grasp it, that 6th graders can grasp it. I mean, William Lane Craig has written books for like 6 and 7-year-olds, you know, that can grasp this stuff. Like, you know, God exists. Where did God come from? Well, he doesn't have a creator because he's God, and that's one of his attributes. Oh, I mean, a 6-year-old can understand that if you don't use the word attribute. So, but yeah, it's so, I mean, I just love this because when you're doing apologetics, you're just always encountering all kinds of surprises and conversations and things. So what are some of those surprises, that you've encountered as you've raised up these apologetics communities globally, as you come in? And so your ministry is like you kind of go into an area where there is no apologetics ministry. And then when you leave, like you've pretty much changed the way people think about the faith. So there would have to be some amazing encounters, and listen, it's sad to say people do that all the time. People go into these communities and change the way people think for better or for worse all the time. I'm thankful you guys are going out there and actually pouring truth into people. So what are some of these surprises that you see coming out of them? Like when you get back home, you're like, wow, like what's the thing you look back at?
Ben, let me jump in first on this one and to share a little bit of background on how we would see a surprise and how we approach it. First off, we have a 7-step model that takes us into a region and takes us from our first trip there all the way to the point at which we leave. And I say that, and we can talk about that more a little bit later. But in the middle of that, after the folks that we've met and we've trained, they've taken our course, what we hope will happen is that they will self-organize, that they will take this and come together and say, okay, how can we apply it? And what has pleasantly and joyfully surprised me is the degree to which the Ugandans that we work with have embraced apologetics, come together, created their own legal nonprofit ministry, according to Ugandan law, called Apologetics Uganda. And almost every day, certainly every week, Ben and I get stories about how they're out at this church or this seminary or this high school or this college sharing apologetics, the joy at which they do it. And then God is clearly at work, because in this particular situation, we work with a church in Western Africa in a small town that's adjacent to one of their major medical universities. So those that we're working with are not only Christians, but they're well educated for Ugandans. They come out doctors when they're fully educated. But what's amazing is that as we train them and they graduate, the government sends these new doctors and pharmacists and nurses out and assign them all over the country, in fact, in other parts of Africa. And so now there are satellite organizations of Apologetics Uganda in the West, the North, the South, and in other parts of Africa. And so you can see this knowledge being spread. This is what we hope to see in our model, and we reach the point where they don't need us anymore, and we're rapidly getting to that point in Uganda, which frees us to go to other places. But that has surprised me. I mean, that's what we hope will happen, but not until it happens are you sure it's going to happen. But Ben, let you talk some more about that.
Yeah, I would second that surprise. This is just a very general surprise, is the enthusiasm and engagement that we found going to places like Uganda, like Zimbabwe, like I was just on a Zoom meeting with some students that we trained in Croatia, and they are doing likewise. Oh my goodness, they are picking up the ball. They have an entire apologetics track that they're designing for a big, huge youth festival in the Balkans. And so seeing it take hold and seeing these young leaders, run with take the baton and start running with it is super gratifying. And I have to say, sadly, that's a bit of surprise, especially with my experience here more in the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes it feels like pushing a wet noodle to get engagement here, where I think, ironically, we have all the resources, so we have no excuse. But boy, you go someplace, beyond the West, and the surprise is always how ready and able and willing they are to go for it.
Oh, Bill, I'll just share real quick.
Go ahead.
A good example of that is that a young lady by the name of Linda, who was a graduate of our course, and she graduated from the medical school. She's a pharmacist, and they assigned her out in the boondocks of Uganda. And she has nothing. But what she is doing is she's teaching youth. And we've got pictures of her standing up in front of hundreds of elementary school kids and we got her a projector, and she's projecting apologetic slides, and she's talking to them, and she's contextualized it down to that level.
Wow.
It's just, my heart goes out to her, and she's making it work with so little resource. Yeah.
Wow. See, that's amazing, because this is like, we're about to see this live. This happens all the time. What people may not realize is Apologetics on Mission is what we consider at Ratio Christi a partner ministry, very much so. They're going in and getting into these areas. Then they report back to me, hey, I've got this guy, and this guy. These are pretty strong leads. Maybe they would be good Ratio Christi missionaries. Then I follow up with them, get the apologetics network started there, and we just are constantly helping each other. It's a very healthy friendship. And as a matter of fact, just a few hours ago, quick story about that. This, like, Emmy met me last year in Rwanda. Super nice guy. I mean, I was immediately impressed. He bought me a Rwandan shirt that's still hanging up in my office. I love it. And I've kept in contact with him for the whole year. It's a year-long hiring process with us, and as of like 3 hours ago, he was hired. And it's like, that's just people just working together and seeing all this stuff. And so now Doug's telling me about this lady in Uganda when literally I just get off the phone with a guy that's in Mombasa, Kenya, that's got a big children's school, 153 students that have Muslim students and everything, and he's wanting to bring apologetics into that school. And immediately my little radar goes off. It's like, oh, so there's a lady in Uganda that's next door to Kenya. Maybe we can get her over to Kenya and teach him how to train. It's just,
by the way,
constant.
Bill, did you know that Emmy is a graduate of our course? I think
he
took
is
the first or the second one. Yeah.
I asked him if he had apologetics training. He said some of the best. I went through the Apologetics on Mission course. so I knew what he knew. And here, and Emmy's such a great success. I mean, he's having, without any help whatsoever, he's holding conferences at universities that have over 1,000 people. I think he said one had 3,500 people.
Wow.
And it just shows you and I think he said now that Ratio Christi is going to be the first established apologetics ministry that he's aware of in Rwanda,
That's right.
and it's like, this is so fresh and so new, but yet it's so ancient. It goes all the way back from the conversation that Jesus had with Nicodemus. I mean, that's a perfect example of apologetics, but for a lot of people, they've just never seen this. I have I use the term, they kind of have the missionary faith. That's kind of the faith that's been imputed to them, imparted to them from missionaries. That it's just like, are you born again? Yes, I made a confession of faith. Here's the Bible. Understand it the best of your ability. We got to go on to the next place, and there's never, so when you go overseas to these places, it's like you all say, it's like a seminary to them. They will take notes on everything you say, especially if you're going through a translator. If you're speaking through a translator, they have time. They will write a manuscript of your sermon, of your talk, because they're like, to them, that's their textbook. So it's, the hunger and the fire, man. It
Actually, we have a guy who just finished our current course. And he just sent me a note, and he says, I'm compiling all my notes from the course and your slides into a book. And he has publishing experience. And I already saw the cover of the book. And I said, it's amazing. You're absolutely right. They take notes, and they will study from it and apply it.
I'm about to name drop here because I think I saw that on our WhatsApp chat. I'm pretty sure that's
Norman Major.
Norman, who is a brilliant guy that was recommended to us through Simon, and he got connected from Ratio Christi into AOM. So it's like, you can see like how all this stuff just constantly is coming together. And so he's going to be our front man for Angola. So we'll be visiting Norman in about a month. I'll be eating dinner at his table. Yeah. So it's such a great I love this about the apologetics community. It doesn't feel like there's ever any competition with any of this. It's all just like kingdom work, And if Tyson James from Reasonable Faith was on here, he'd be echoing all of this. Like, we talk to him all the time too. So
that's the great spot to interject here on this whole concept of partnership. So, this is another maybe surprise, but it shouldn't be a surprise. there is no way that one single ministry can do all this work.
No
It's
way.
only going to work by us all collaborating. And so we take a very collaborative approach with this. We all fill different you know parts of the whole project, but it's why Bill, it's like it's so great to see you coming on board so strong with Ratio Christi. I've known Ratio Christi for a long, long time, and it's the perfect fit for what we're doing. And what Ratio Christi can do for apologetics on the university campus. I mean, if I were to pick one thing, that's the spot to be in. So we're just really happy to be able to work with you. But like you say, it's an entire community. Part of our call is, come along with us. And
Yeah.
we've got to do this together. And we might be the catalyst to get things started. We might be the front end of the spear, but we need all the help we can get from ministries like Ratio Christi, Reasonable Faith, Stand to Reason, all these guys.
Yeah, one of the things that we've discovered, particularly in East Africa, is early on we looked to see, are there other apologetic organizations or apologists? And we did discover a few in East Africa, but they were stovepiped. They didn't know one another. And so once we connected Apologetics Uganda with these other organizations, then pretty soon they're just connecting with one another, and they don't need the white guys from the West anymore, And so then now they're sharing their own resources, and in fact, they are teaming together when they go to these various universities and schools. So that's exactly what we want to see. But it's a partnership with indigenous organizations and Western organizations. We bring the resources, they bring
That's
the
right.
energy and the on-ground understanding. Yeah.
That's exactly, just to echo what you just said, Doug. That's what I tell people whenever I come into a new country. It's like, we're not interested in setting up Ratio Christi in Kenya. We want to set up Ratio Christi Kenya, and they grab that immediately. They're like, oh, well, good. It's like, because what do I mean, I know probably more about Kenya than any other country in the world about doing apologetics there, and different views of the dowry system and the Bible and all these other things. And Kevin Marithi has been a big help to that with releasing that new Langham Press book on apologetics in Africa and introduction and things like that. A lot of really strong apologetics and theology coming out of Kenya, especially. But it's always better if they can do it. And our Kenyan team is a great example of that. Here are guys, before they were even hired on full time, they multiplied from 3 to 7 people before they were even hired. They weren't even through the process yet.
Wow.
And I just hired one of our new guys, William, and I interviewed him today. William said that they have already expanded to yet another university in Kenya. So now we have 4 Ratio Christi chapters in 4 universities in Kenya with like 7 missionaries, and one of which is a language scholar, like one of the top language scholars I've ever met. It's crazy what kind of diamonds in the rough, I call them, are just out there. And it's just like, hey, here's a ministry platform for you, and they just go with it.
They do.
And
Well, you're highlighting, sort of. You asked what was a surprise. It's the rapid adoption acceptance, and just like I say, in the few years we've been working, things are changing big time. In Africa. So I can no longer say, hey, there's nothing happening in apologetics. Now we're moving on to, let's see the ministries really flourish, and we need to see some academies offer degree programs. On the ground there. So that's another aspect of what we try to do as a catalytic ministry is, for them to really be self-sustaining and be able to really do the research and the development that is contextualized to their region. We really need to see some scholars there. And you mentioned Kevin Muruthi is one of them, but we got to have a lot more. We've got John Njoroge there in Kenya as well. We've got Simon Brace down in South Africa, but we need to see more of these apologetically trained leaders become academicians.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and Bill, a quick story here that reinforces something you said earlier. Um, these Ugandans that we'd been teaching, and they were starting to self-organize, and they came to Ben and I, and they surprised us. They said, "Would it be okay? Could we form an organization called AOM Uganda?" Now, Ben and I were surprised. We were honored, but very quickly we said, no, really, we want you to create your own organization. We don't need AOM satellites around the world. Now, I think culturally they were just being very polite and asking that question about could they be part of us. But when we turned it around and said, no, we'll support you establishing your own, I think ultimately that's what they wanted. But they were being polite when they first asked, and they have just run with it. So, yeah, they have to own it. They have to
yeah.
own it, and they do. Yeah.
Well, and they ought to, especially something with apologetics. It can get very cultural very fast. It's like,
Right. It
you
should.
talk about differences in cultural differences. Well, I had a crash course in that in 2023 when Kevin Marithi asked me to come over to Kenya and asked me to speak on homosexuality. Well, it's like, well, I just thought that would probably translate the same about everywhere. But, when you give the dowry system and all the other things that go into the marriage in Kenya and things like that, it was almost a totally different way of looking at life. And thankfully, I had enough grace because I don't have this kind of wisdom. I just had enough grace to ask the right people, and they kind of informed me what Kenyans are actually thinking about it. I had to change my whole presentation, the first 2 days I was there. So it's like, yeah, it's so much better if the people in those countries are doing stuff. And, and time would fail us if we're talking about all the movement right now with Samuel Nissan and the people in Hong Kong and Taiwan you guys were just meeting with. I mean, there's some of the world's top apologists right over there in Southeast Asia too. So Andrew Loke, that's who I was trying to think of, is over there and things. It's just, yeah, pretty amazing stuff going on overseas, and I'm just privileged to be part of it and watch it. I feel like I'm just kind of a participant on the sidelines here cheering them on. It's like, yeah. So, by the way, it's we're at the top of the hour at 7:00 already, and I told these guys it'll be a quick conversation. I don't even think we'll make it through the questions we have here, but if anybody has any questions or any input or anything, we would love to bring that question onto the broadcast and answer it for you. It doesn't have to be about missions, but if you have any apologetics questions, these guys would be glad to, we're all practitioners. We'd be glad to be challenged. We'd also be glad to answer anything that's on your heart out there. So we want to make sure that you guys have that input, as we always do. With the truth conversation, that's kind of the ethos. We want everybody to be part of this conversation. So shout out to all of our live viewers right now. Please send us a question in so we can highlight that. And we've had a lot of God bless yous and a lot of Ebenezer off the lobby said, I'm glad to see Ben and Doug here. They're doing a great job in Africa. It's like, but we really, we're question people. So feel free to send in a question, even if it's something that's on your heart that's like has nothing to do with this conversation. Be like, well, here's a question I've always had about Christianity. This really upsets me, and I'd really like to know. And it gives us an opportunity to put our passion to work. So, but here's a question for you guys. We've been talking a lot about this, but what I think I already know the answer. I think you might have already said it, but what is most gratifying about this? And, I love to travel, and I'm a little bit younger than you guys, but
I think you're a lot younger.
I'm also a lot fatter too. So
we'll have the same amount of hair, the two of us.
There you go. Yeah. So air travel and stuff, man, that's not why we do this. And you know what I notice when I go to these places overseas and people say, like, what do you remember? It's always the people for me. Like, I've seen probably the most beautiful temple. I don't know how anything could be more beautiful than Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Seeing the sunrise over that brought a tear to my eye. It was absolutely stunning beautiful. But what I most remember from my trip to Cambodia are those 5 kids that made a profession of faith by coming forward in an honor shame culture in a you know, in the Cambodian culture. My missionary friend said that never happens. I can't believe these, and it was just out of ignorance that I said, here's the gospel. If anybody would like prayer, come forward. And he said to call them out in front of everybody like that was a huge cultural no-no. Wow. But the fact that they responded means that they really, really meant it, Wow. And I was like, that's the things that I really take home with me, it's like at the end of the day. So what are some of those?
They're not inviting you back due to these cultural faux pas then.
Right. I'm not going to Cambodia this summer either. So no, it's funny. Yeah. No, I'm always welcome in Cambodia. That's a beautiful place. You guys, that'd be a good place for AOM to check out. It really is. So what are some of those gratifying experiences for you guys? Like, what do you take home with you when you're done with this trip, with these trips?
Well, I'll go first. There's so many, but I would say the most gratifying experiences I have, and it happens often, which is great. It's that moment when somebody who is new to apologetics, the lights go on, and they realize that, you know what, it's okay to ask questions. It's good to ask questions. In fact, it's even okay to have doubts. And those doubts can really lead to a deep exploration, trying to discover the answers. And when you do discover the answers, that sense of just connectedness with the truth is so gratifying. And to see somebody who hasn't really had that experience yet have that door open to them, and they start thinking, they start having those aha moments, and start recognizing the role that apologetics plays along with their entire walk with Jesus. That, to me, when I see that light go on, it's like, yeah, that's what this is all about.
Yeah, and I have to agree. But I'll tell you, the events or the instances that really have caught my attention and have stuck with me, and in fact, I say this now when I'm with them, with my brothers and sisters around the world, the privilege it is to worship with our brothers and sisters around the world and be part of worship services that are theologically the same, but they worship in so different ways. We were in Uganda, and it wasn't long before the music's playing, and these guys have picked up the chairs, and they're holding the chairs up over their head. They're dancing all around, and just the joy to be a part of that. Now, that's not me. In fact, the pastor, now here's this pastor from Western Uganda. He sneaks up behind me while all of this commotion is going on, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Doug, are you part of the Frozen Chosen?" Now, the reality is that for the most part, we don't worship that. We don't express ourselves in that physical, outgoing way. Now, there's exceptions in the West, of course, but it's natural for them. And I'll say to them, this is a picture of heaven. We're going to be together someday in eternity, and we're going to worship together. And all of this is going to come together. And I feel a bond with my brothers and sisters around the world that in many instances I don't feel with my own family members, my non-believing family members. And so that's the real joy. And to see other Christians in other situations and different conditions and persecution, sharing their faith and surviving, and just see the joy of God in their eyes, that's the thrilling moment for me, really.
Yeah, I got to share one more here. This is hopefully will illustrate some of the fruit that we're seeing from all this. And Doug was there. He'll remember this and probably share in the feeling of gratitude. But I think it was last year we were invited to Zimbabwe to a conference. It was our first time in Zimbabwe, and And we had a good friend who has a broad network and brought together uh, a select group of pastors and leaders from about 10 countries, including Zimbabwe, to do about 3 days of apologetics. And so as we got to know him, we we really had the feeling that, hey, this would be a great opportunity for us to be able to show to this group of leaders what's happened in Uganda. So we tentatively and cautiously broached the subject with Jeffrey, saying, hey, Jeffrey, would it be out of line for us to bring two of our students who are now out in the field doing amazing apologetics in Uganda, to have them join us in this conference, and maybe they could even say a few words. Well, that grew, and so before we knew it, we had Jemba and Moses come down with us. These are core leaders from Apologetics Uganda, and they were able to give, I can't remember how many presentations they were able to give. And these are young guys, and we were kind of nervous about putting them up front and giving them the floor to actually teach on such things as the problem of evil to this, this group of leaders from 10 countries in Southern Africa. And at the end of that, Jeffrey and a number of other of the leaders said, that was the most encouraging thing we've seen for a long time. To see these young guys up there defending the faith, doing such a great job, it's really inspirational. We need to see that happening in our countries. So that was really gratifying, and I'm so glad we made the call to invite and bring them and give them the opportunity to show that kind of fruit and to model what could be happening all over Africa.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
One of the older pastors that was there, I mean, they were all older for the most part, came up to me in tears after Moses spoke. And I wondered what was going on. He goes, this so encourages me that we have young Africans like this who can speak so well and are knowledgeable.
Yeah.
We have a future. And that was something I mentioned earlier. That was an example of pretty soon all of these black leaders, pastors from South Africa, their focus shifted away from the two white guys into these two young black, and they were just laser focused on them and established relationships. It was wonderful.
That is, and that's what it's all about right there. That's the proverbial, washing your brother's feet kind of thing. We're really trying to do is get this mobilized overseas. We can't live there. We can't live in Uganda and go to Taiwan at the same time, and that's, so it's, that's always encouraging. And I can echo that, as a local chapter director at Houston Christian University, we took our first big student team to Romania a few weeks ago, and to watch my students stand up and give hard topics on the problem of evil, paradigm shifts was one of the topics. I'm like, gosh, 19-year-old girl giving a paradigm shift talk. I'm like, this is amazing. And and the bravery of one of my officers, Braden, getting up and talking about the intersection between faith and politics in the American context in Romania with all that's going on right now. And that was the topic of conversation all day. People were talking about that. There's a lot going on in Eastern Europe right now. So but I can just remember sitting there thinking, like, I don't need to talk today. Like, if they want to take up too much, please, you all keep going. Like, this is great.
Yeah. And that's our goal. I mean, that is a win. That's a success when they take the baton and they start going for it.
Yeah.
When we start, when Ben and I sit down and say, well, when do we know when it's time to walk away, that they don't need us anymore? That particular incident was a huge sign that these guys on their own could stand up and speak so well, so professionally, and so with such wisdom that I said, Ben, we're one step closer to them not needing us any longer, and we're getting there.
Yeah, and the apologetics world, nothing wrong with this whatsoever. We've had a real renaissance in apologetics here lately. We've had people show up like Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, you know, um, Frank Turek. I forgot his name.
Greg Kokel.
Greg Kokel. Yeah, Greg Kokel.
Yeah.
You know, and they've all established these ministries, and they're going all over the world. Or Hugh Ross. You mentioned Hugh Ross earlier, Reasons to Believe. And they go all over the world. And a lot of apologetics ministries, I've heard somebody say this not too long ago. They said, your ministry is different in that it's not built on the shoulders of like any one person. And I never thought about that. Like, that's true about Ratio Christi. Nobody knows any of us. Like, we're just this thing, you know. Mm-hmm. It's the same way with Apologetics on Mission. And it's, you know, that's a good thing. And I'm not, by the way, I am not at all saying that we're better than those other ministries, because all of those ministries, we all work together with them. And at these national conferences and things, we're all, you know, eating at IHOP together and talking about stuff, and we all work together. But there is something about you guys are not the star of the show when you go to Uganda. Like, that's right. Beautiful. That's what it all ought to be about. As a matter of fact, one of my buddies just got on here and said I was introduced to apologetics through Frank Turek's page. See, that's great. Yeah. Like, that's what it's all about. Yeah. And so now she is on this broadcast with a bunch of no-name dudes.
Well, you know, I like to think about it. It's kind of like the music business. You know, we need rock stars, right? And we celebrate rock stars, and they make great music and introduce us into it. But then, you know, there's a lot of local bands, and there's a lot of local musicians, and I can't remember who. I'm sure you guys will remember who the apologist that said it was. We don't need, we already have enough $1 million apologists. We need a bunch of $1 apologists out there in the street, in the church, doing the stuff. Right. And really, you know, what we're trying to do is to get that whole thing started and at the grassroots.
That's right. That's right. And I think that was Greg Kokel that might have said that.
Probably.
But yeah, I know what you're saying there, Ben. Everybody's heard of Rush. Very few people have heard of Dream Theater. Without Rush, there'd never be Dream
Theater.
You go. That's for all the music fans out there.
We better stop this conversation. Otherwise, we're going to get completely derailed.
There you go. I want to bring this in. Somebody actually sent in a question from Pixels of Light on this is off the YouTube channel. He or she said, tuned in late, sorry if not applicable. Are there certain authors or resources that you find most useful in your efforts? So name some resources. What are some of the top resources for you guys?
Ben, I'll let you name maybe the website stuff that we refer our students to, and we can both talk about various books, I think, that are meaningful.
Absolutely. So one of the challenges in the regions we work is not always can people have easy access to books. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the resources that we're pointing to first are, certain, YouTube channels. We love William Lane Craig's animated series that go through. In fact, we use those a lot in our training. We love the resources at Stand to Reason, at Reasonable Faith. I mentioned RTB. Frank Turek is doing some great stuff at Cross Examine. So we refer people to those type of resources. Of course, Truth Conversations is a wonderful one here, but there's just a tremendous amount of those kind of resources. One of the things we do try to do every time we travel is we'll bring about 50 pounds worth of books, and so building up local libraries is something that's really useful, and they treasure those books. And we'll usually bring, I love On Guard by William Lane Craig is a great one. We love both The Story of Christianity and Tactics from Stand to Reason. The list is long of books that we refer people to.
Yeah, we in our course, we assume they don't have books, and so we probably capture more information on our slides than you might normally see, because those slides turn into references for them. But we always list the basic books that are behind the development of that particular lesson, in the hope that, if they're going to get books, if they get the opportunity, those are the books they should focus on. And as Ben said, we try to fill up a suitcase and take them the books. And some of I'll just highlight one, because one of the things that we particularly emphasize in our course, and turns out to be well received, is the whole knowledge surrounding worldviews and how the knowledge of worldviews can help you in evangelism. And a book that I personally highlight because it made a big impact in my early years of apologetics is The Universe Next Door by James Sire. And that particular book has actually been used in secular universities and philosophy departments and whatnot. But its general approach, and our students appreciate this, particularly when they interact with Muslims and other distinct worldviews, is it gives them a way of examining a worldview. What are those big questions? And then compares the worldviews. And this book certainly lays it out and makes it very, very apparent that the biblical worldview, the comprehensiveness, the cohesion, the story is tight in terms of Christianity and its worldview, whereas it is not with others. And so that's a book that we highly recommend. But the issue we have found outside the Western world, particularly in Africa, is the lack of books. And it's very difficult to even get them books. And so, as Ben mentioned, we're working with some universities, indigenous universities, to help them establish some apologetic programs. But the issue of books is going to be big because they're going to have to use books, and the question is where the student's going to get them. So we're working.
Yeah, I know. I have bought books for people in Pakistan on Amazon and shipped it right to them. It's there in like 8 days. So in that sense, thank God for Amazon that we can do that. But also, Amazon doesn't ship to Kenya, which baffles me. I don't know why we can ship to Pakistan and not Kenya. So it's like, you just never know. It's certainly not going to ship to a place like Cuba, or something like that. Yeah. And so it's like, like you said, getting books over there and trying to make that more accessible. And people overseas actually devour PDF books, if you can even find that. I know people in America, I hear people say that all the time, like, oh, I don't like digital books. It's like, that's a first world problem there. Like, that's the only, I know people have went through their entire master's degree with digital books because that's all they have, There's no library.
We had a woman, Bill, that took our course, an American woman, and she was so overwhelmed and overjoyed by all her fellow African students. And when she heard that they didn't have the books, she came to us upon graduation and said, I want to donate $500 just to buy books because I know you guys will take them over there. And we did. And we put her name in the cover of each one, donated by Erin. And when we got to Uganda and gave them, all the Ugandans posed with a picture, each one of them holding a book and opening it up to her donation. It was wonderful. She knew she was making a difference in that situation. Yeah.
That's true, and that's true too. That is one way that like you can support us is send us some good quality books that we can just take overseas. I know that's for me personally. I can give you, shoot me an email at billscott@ratiochristi.org, and I will talk with you, give you my address. You can ship the book to me, and I'll take it here. I leave out in about a month, to go to 12 different countries. And if I know somebody over there needs a book, I try to take it if I can. So,
one of the huge values of these physical books that may not be quite that obvious, but when you've got a little, even a small collection of an assortment of apologetics topics, if you got those on the shelf, they can be the door into which the entire world of apologetics opens up. So somebody pulls it off the shelf, they don't know anything about it, you strike up a conversation, and all of a sudden, again, it's that eye-opening experience. And then they go on to discover, well, what else is out there like this? And then they can discover the PDFs and whatnot. But having even a small library of these kind of resources can be huge.
Yeah, because you never know who could read that and it change an entire church culture. Like the thing that excites me about one of my interviews this morning is I know that one of the guys we interviewed that were establishing a chapter at their elementary school is attached to a church group that's got 69 churches in 5 different African nations. And it's like, what kind of wave could that cause? Like it's, right. and it really could. It really could, So, well, if you want my input on books, I echo the On Guard is a great place to start. If you want a good essay resource, Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis is a great big volume. If you want something you can just refer to all the time, you don't have to read all 900 pages of it, but it's all in one sitting. Although I do highly recommend it. And and it just depends on your topic too, right? I mean, you've got, apologetics is like, that's everything. There's apologetics in art. There's apologetics in culture, apologetics in sexuality, apologetics in humanism, apologetics in science and in history. And so, there's all kinds of things, but definitely.
Bill, I would, I in answer to the question that was posed in a while back, I would also commend some of Lee Strobel's books. The Case for Christ, The Case for the Creator. They were actually pretty instrumental for me to introduce me to the other people, right? Because he goes around and interviews, the key influencers, on these various topics. So that's a great entry point. His books are really accessible, really well written for the layperson.
I was just getting ready to say in our webinar last week for Ratio Christi International, Mike Lycona said the exact same thing. So you're in good company there. He said start with the Case for Christ. You have Case for Creator, Case for Faith, Case for, and like you said, it's very like 6th grade reading level, but it introduces you to the whole body of scholars that like where he's interviewing these people. And actually I was going to mention this one, my friend Alex. She said Cultural Apologetics by Paul Gould.
Yes.
That's a great one. That's a really, really good one, too. I was actually going to mention that. Thank you, Alex. So, man, 7:26. We're coming down to the wire. That's all it takes. Everybody that comes on this podcast, they said, so it's an hour and a half? I'm like, you'd be surprised. It doesn't take long. So I want to ask you guys, as a ministry, how can people engage with AOM? And then we'll have to end it up there. So so now that they've heard what Apologetics on Mission is doing, how can they engage? If they want to get involved, how do they get involved? How do they give? So let's hear the spiel.
Well,
call
of course,
Ben.
Call me. Of course, go to our website first. And you can connect with us through the website. I'll give everybody my email address is the best way to get a hold of us. It's real easy. It's Ben, BEN, at apologeticsonmission.org.
And mine's similar. Mine's Doug at the same thing. So
and Bill, we're grateful to be on with you here because the call is out there. We need a lot of help. You know this. You need a lot of help. We all need to band together. So if you are an apologetically minded person and you have a heart for missions, both Doug and I, everybody engaged in AOM has been so amazed at bringing those two elements together. Going on mission with apologetics is really a gratifying personal thing to do, and it's really needed out there. So if that's you, send us an email, and we usually love to get on a quick Zoom intro call, and we let the Lord lead us from there, and that's how we grow.
Yeah, amen. Well, and same for Ratio Christi. If your burden is the college campus or some sort of school, and you want to bring apologetics into that part of the public square, then we would love to talk to you as well. Just hop on our website. It's easy to get connected to us. So we're just thankful. We're just one big team. We call Apologetics on Mission. They're the tip of the spear. They're going into these countries that have never heard the term apologetics. And I've had the privilege of introducing that term to groups of people that have never heard it before. And it's just so gratifying to do that. And so that's what these guys do full time. And I think you're leaving. Don't you leave next week? I think you're going somewhere
Monday.
Monday. Where are you going?
Going back to Uganda, going through Rwanda. So picking up Emmy and going to Uganda.
Yeah.
And while he's there, we're kicking off our brand new advanced course on the apologetics of Jesus. So they'll be going on simultaneously. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Plenty of work to do. So is it too late to sign up for the Apologetics of Jesus course, Doug?
It is not. Just I tell you what, we'll give you one more email, and that's Jim, Jim at apologeticsonmission.org. He's our registrar, and he'll take your request, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. I love your courses. They're you get a lot of bang for your buck out of Apologetics on Mission courses. So highly suggest those. All right, well guys, thank you so much for being with us today. As they say, as they used to say in Bombo, Uganda, be free. That was the greeting. I don't know if you've ever got that, but they would grab your hands, be free, be free. And God bless you guys. And we'll see you soon. I'm sure we'll cross paths, and if not, Ben, I'll see you once a month on a scheduled call.
Amen.
So,
Will, we really appreciate what you're doing. It's just been amazing to see what's happening with Ratio Christi International. So great job.
And we hope to see a lot more Ratio Christi students in our November class.
Yeah. The list is already compiling, so you'll see. So yeah, well, God bless you guys. We'll see you. We'll have you back on soon.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Right. Appreciate it.
Yep. Well, guys, that's what we have for you tonight. Thank you so much for joining in on another Truth Conversation. If you have any suggestions on who you'd like to see on the broadcast or anything, reach out. And as we were saying earlier, check out Apologetics on Mission's website. Check out Ratio Christi's website. Shoot us an email. We'd love to get connected with you. And if you're somewhere and you're watching this overseas somewhere especially, I know we would all love to hear from you and see what we could do to get your ministry off the ground. So thank you guys. God bless you. And in the meantime, just keep us in your prayers. We'll see you next time.